I have been a member of SCOL International for the last 42 years. SCOL International is very much like Rotary, but it's limited only to people in the travel and tourism industry. We're in, I think, 85 countries in the world as of now, and with a membership of about 25,000. In 1989-90, I was national U.S. president. We had 83 clubs in the U.S. then in major cities around the country. And I was following a predecessor whose name was Joe Neary. He was president before me, and as the past president, he was the international counselor for the United States. That means to say that he sat on a council at 2 meetings a year, and 53 members made up the whole world at that time. And the business sessions are a little bit like a mini United Nations. It's run in English, Spanish, and French with simultaneous translations. And he was our delegate to be at our International Congress that year, which was going to be in Sri Lanka, in the city of Colombo. Now, Joe was a great big advocate for Colombo getting the Congress, which they were successful. 18 days before he was going to fly out as our delegate for the United States, he had a stroke in his garden and died. He was 55 years old, a young man. I was his deputy counselor, and I was going to Colombo anyway, but I now took over his duties at the Congress. The Congress was in October of 1990, 20 years ago. Unrelated to that, my wife is a Catholic and a secular Carmelite, and in February of that year she met a lady in our hometown of Port St. Lucie, Florida, who was wearing a sari, and Anita said, kind of, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Sri Lanka. She said, well, that's funny, my husband is going to go to a meeting there in October. She said, would he mind taking a package for me? I took the package and delivered it in Colombo in October. The delivery address was a Carmel convent. It was a Carmelite, actually it was the provincial house for the Carmelites. They have 33 convents in Sri Lanka and 3 in Pakistan that they're responsible for. So I delivered this package of rosaries, and I met the sisters, and we just chatted, and they said, would you like to see what we do? And I said, well, I have time, yeah, I'd be very interested. So I'd had a car from the airport, from the hotel. They'd provided a car for me and a driver. So we piled into the car, and 2 of the sisters came with me, and we went into a very bad slum. It's probably, I don't know all the slum areas of Colombo, but there's probably none worse than the area of Wanathamula, which is really very bad. There the sisters operated a daycare facility for about 70 to 75 youngsters between 3 months old and 5 years old, and it's called the Bethlehem Creche. And none of the kids stay overnight. They're all brought in the morning, starting maybe around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And the sisters bathe them and give them clean clothes every day. And so, you know, by 9 o'clock the kids are clean. And there was 2 parts to it. The real babies, there was just a nursery. But the 3, 4, 5-year-olds, there was like a daycare facility where they do some teaching dancing and little classes and so forth. So we were there, and I met the Sister Suzanne, who was the sister in charge there, and we sat and talked, and I asked her how the operation was funded. And she said, well, the sisters at that time were getting, I think, the equivalent of $9 a month from the church, but they got nothing at all from any government agencies. The sisters would say, well, I said, how do you get the food to give these kids a little lunch and some milk and so forth? And they said, well, typically we go into the markets and we beg for food. And we want people to give us some rice, some vegetables, some powdered milk, whatever we can get, we give to the kids. And as I always say, I'm a beer drinker, and I waste $5 on a beer so often I'm ashamed to say it, really. But that really put things into perspective for me. So after we left the daycare center, we went back to the convent, and then went into, the sisters showed me their church, the All Saints Church. And one of the interesting things about the church is that they have a cross over the pulpit, and in the center of the cross is a picture of the Virgin Mary. and it's made out of gemstones, because in Sri Lanka gem production is quite, as well as tea, but those are probably the two biggest domestic sources of income. And where people haven't had any money to put into the collection, they've put in some precious or semi-precious stones, and they have this picture of the Virgin Mary made out of these jewels that were given in the collection. It's a beautiful thing. But anyway, we prayed there, and I have to say I was touched. I was given 10 words. I want to help, I can help, I will help. I took two of my friends the next day back to see what I had seen, because I wanted some support for what I was thinking. And they were friends of Joe Neary as well, because we were all on the same national board together. And we decided that we would do something to help them. We had no idea what it would be, but that we would help them in some way. And we would dedicate it to Joe. So it became not registered or anything, but it became the Joe Neary Memorial Charity. The focus has been, over the last 20 years, has been to raise money for the sisters to put into investments, which we use CDs, or they call them fixed interest deposits, and they only use the interest for their work. That gives them a source of dependable income. It's not enough, but it gives them something that they know they're going to get every month. And interest rates there in Sri Lanka are not like here, that we've had as high as 19.75%. The last ones we got last month when I was there was 11% based upon interest paid at maturity, or 10.75 if it's taken out every month. So it's still a very reasonable return. We started to solicit money from other clubs in our association. We have it's on our international website, and so we've pushed it within our own organization. And also I would go to churches, and some that I would know and some that I don't know, and ask the priests there if they would consider putting a little 3 or 4 or 5 line notice in their church bulletins as and when they have the space. So that has given us another source of income, and it's small by comparison. I mean, now after 20 years we probably have the equivalent of somewhere between $140,000 and $150,000 that's sitting in investments in Sri Lanka. Our first project we started in 1990, which was to help provide funds for the sisters to take care of the kids at the daycare center. And in 2004 the provincial superior asked us if we would consider looking at another part of what they do, because they said it's not enough, but we have a greater need somewhere else. So we reached a level of about 5 million rupees, which was about $50,000. And we said, well, we'll stop it there. And then we went on to this other project, which is a small girls' high school in a bad area again, where the kids, they were dropping out after kindergarten, if you can believe that. And so they opened the school in 1985. And in 2004, the provincial superior said, I think we may have to close the school because we just have no money. There's 12 teachers, and some months they got paid and some months they didn't. Would you mind doing the same program for that school? So we did, and we changed, and we started raising money for the high school. That time they had about 100 students. 55 of them were living in a dorm because they had no home situations where they could stay at home. So we were fairly successful, and early last year, I think it was February of 2009, we reached another level of 5 million rupees, and they said, now we have another request, would you consider a third project? And this is for an orphanage for 40 children that is being built in the same campus as where the daycare center is. It's very low-lying and used to flood once or twice every year, and flood badly, and to the point the buildings were falling down. We actually saw them in our visit there in 2003. So, but they've knocked the bad buildings down. They've added 5.5 feet of elevation, and they've built. First of all, they built the convent, because without the sisters there, the orphanage wouldn't work. You couldn't build the orphanage without having the people to run the orphanage. So they built the convent first, and that was opened by the Archbishop of Colombo in February of this year. and now they're building the orphanage, and they've got to the point of about 25% complete. They had to stop building it in July of this year because of lack of funds, and that's what we're working on right now. They still need about $135,000 to complete the orphanage, and they will do it. Our project is not for the capital, it's not for that. We are collecting money that will be invested the same way, but it's not being used right now. So all the interest that's being generated is actually being refunded back into more CDs again. So we have about the equivalent of about $24,000 in that account now. So now the other accounts, we insist that the sisters do not take out all the interest every month. They take out a lot, maybe 80–90% of it, so that there's a balance that continues to build. As an example of that, since 2004, when we stopped funding the Bethlehem Creche daycare facility, we had 5 million rupees. We now have 7 million rupees in that account because they're not taking everything out every month. So it's still, even though it's not being funded with outside donations, it is still building. And the school, we stopped funding it at 5 million, and there's almost 6 million in that now. So, and that's rupees, not dollars. So that's kind of what we do. We've done other things over the years. After the tsunami, we had a special fundraiser of all the benefactors. I did a mailing to our benefactors, and you know, we all get solicited so much. I don't go back to people, and I might send them some photographs. Like this time, we were just in Sri Lanka. I am sending some of them some photographs and just saying this was our trip, and and that may stimulate something. But I'm not going to people with my hand out again. We've had some, you know, everything from loose change from kids to a parish that I went to recently and asked the priest for if he would consider putting an announcement in the bulletin, and he was very nice but told me he wouldn't do it because he doesn't want to nickel and dime his parishioners. But 5 minutes later wrote me a check for $10,000, which blew me away. Another church, I went and asked the same thing, and the priest said, well, I tell you what I'll do. If you can make a 4 or 5 minute video, we'll show it, and you'll have a second collection of one weekend, which we did a year and a half ago, and it was $6,000. So you know, we've had everything from a few pennies to donations like that. So it's like the Bible says, you know, you cast the seed, and some falls on stony ground, and some bears fruit. You know, we were just there. My wife and I went back. It was my 4th visit, my wife's 3rd visit, and when you see what you're doing firsthand, I don't know what I'm doing, but what the benefactors' investments are doing, it's incredible. You tear up. I mean, the sisters, I mean, the teachers at the school made such a point to come and thank us, and yet, you know, the highest paid teacher in the school currently is getting the equivalent of $133 a month. That's the highest paid teacher, and they're still doing it. I mean, and it's just incredible. It's just incredible. And so when you see it firsthand, when you are given an opportunity, take it. You know, my son-in-law said to my daughter once, he wished he could find something like that. But you can't just go out and say, well, I'm going to do this. You've got to be touched by it. And if you look for it, I mean, if you had asked me then that in October of 1990, that 20 years later we would have $140,000, I would have said, we're not going to do that. You know, be open to the opportunities that are given to you, and if you are, you'll see something, and you'll see a need somewhere. And it might be, you know, I went to a priest once down in Stewart, Florida, and I went to he was quite a good friend of ours. He was the pastor of our church. And I said, Father, you know, would you consider doing this? And he said, well, Bill, I will do that. But, you know, if you want to help poor people, come in my car. Within 30 minutes, I'll take you out to Indiantown, and you'll see the same thing in Indiantown. And so, you know, and he said, whilst I'm very sympathetic to Sri Lanka, it's halfway around the world, I would rather help the people in my own diocese because they need it just as much, you know. So you've got to see something and say, hey, I can help.